We're Enlightenment practitioners. And being an Enlightenment practitioner isn't a label that you have to somehow live up to. Being an Enlightenment practitioner is about practicing enlightenment. Sometimes this is easy, sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's extremely difficult. It varies. It varies from day to day. It varies from moment to moment. I suppose in terms of difficulty, I'd put it somewhere between giving up a smoking habit and a heroin addiction. I've not actually ever had a smoking habit or been addicted to heroin, but I can appreciate how very, very difficult it is to beat these addictions. And being an Enlightenment practitioner means beating addictions. And there are two addictions that we need to beat. We don't just beat them, we cut ourselves off from them altogether. I sometimes talk about stepping back, bypassing. The text talks about cutting asunder, which is more in keeping with the spirit. And what are these two addictions then that as spiritual practitioners we have to cut ourselves asunder from? They are two realities. They are the reality of our ego and the reality of this stage that we call the world. And these two realities are like two poles of a magnet, our ego personality and the world, and there's a strong magnetic field between them. And this is what we get lost in. We get lost in this magnetic field. There's a very tight force between the ego personality and this stage called the world, which we are constantly getting lost in. So this is a tough number. These are tough addictions to beat. It's a difficult situation to extricate ourselves from. This is our work as Enlightenment practitioners. And the next verse tells us exactly what we're up against here. It describes this magnetic field quite well. Verse 307. Depending on the false imagination, there obtains the relativity aspect of existence. From the conjunction of form and name, there rises false imagination. It might not be immediately apparent how this relates to what I've just been saying, but the false imagination is one pole. It's the ego pole, and what's described here as the relativity aspect of existence, well, this is what we imagine to be the external world. It's what we relate to. This is the relativity aspect, it's what we relate to. The relativity aspect. So the false imagination, this is the filter of our ego. And our ego here consists of our psychological disposition, our moods, our deep-rooted feelings. And this is how we filter the world. We filter the world accordingly. We believe that there's something out there, and we filter it in accordance with our disposition. What's called here the false imagination, which has actually been the subject of the previous two videos and will be the subject of the next 2 or 3 videos. So this isn't simply a psychological aspect any more than giving up smoking is a matter of psychology. It's to do with managing some very uncomfortable feelings. Most of the time you might feel you're doing okay, but then there come these crunch moments where the only way to resolve them is to give in to the addiction, or apparently so. Now, I said this isn't a matter of psychology, and I suspect some people might disagree with that, but I see psychology here as a way of making excuses. You either stick to it or you don't. That's what it boils down to. And you cannot really stick to it if you're still caught up in that particular world. You need to be able to step back from it, to cut yourself asunder from it. It's a question of how we see ourselves, how we see the world. And these two are mutually reinforcing. How we see ourselves is the false imagination, and how we see the world is the relativity aspect of existence. And how we see ourselves very much influences how we see the world. So this is what the first phrase here means. From the conjunction of form and name there arises false imagination. And it's self-reinforcing. Once you see the world in a certain way, it reinforces the false imagination. It says dependent on name and form. These are the constructions that you pick out from what appears to be going on. So if you think the world's a pretty awful place, you'll identify, this is the name and form, things which reinforce that. And this reinforces a particular feeling in yourself. It's a particular uncomfortable feeling, but we reinforce it. This is what we do. The name and form is that filter which reinforces our own moods, our own disposition. So this is what I mean by it's a magnetic field. This is these two realities, the false imagination or the ego or our disposition, our moods, construct a particular reality which feeds the tone of our moods, of our disposition. So this is what we have to be aware of. This is what we have to step back from, cut ourselves asunder from. And we really are up against it sometimes. The two examples that I mentioned, that of giving up cigarettes or coming off a heroin addiction, are quite significant in certain ways. Because there's a physiological dependency. It's not just psychology, is it? There's actually a physiological dependency. This goes right down to the heart of our psychophysical being. And this is why it can be tough practicing enlightenment. Because we not only have to deal with our physiology and whatever its current state is, we've got to deal with our DNA. Putting it in modern terms, traditional terms, we can talk about past karma. You might go along with that way of thinking or not, but even if you don't, you've still got your DNA to deal with. The DNA that you've inherited from your parents. And my parents' DNA was an obvious mismatch. They should never have got married. But I've got both these sets of DNA in me. What a thing to deal with. So, a lot of the time it's not exactly a walk in the park. And I'm doing this part-time night shift job. And that's an interesting one. Because when you're tired, you see yourself, don't you? Most people, when they're tired, they get a bit irritable, a bit grumpy. Well, if you're an Enlightenment practitioner, this is something to work with. Do you just give in to that grumpiness and that irritability? It's an opportunity to step further back, So I've got a night shift tonight, and I'm at a particularly low ebb because I've got a cold as well. And again, having a cold, well, that's something else to deal with. Hopefully, I'm not going to be too busy tonight, but it's still going to be a bit uncomfortable one way or the other. I could phone in sick, I suppose, but I'm not that bad. Yeah, and being on a low ebb like this and thinking about the night shift, I could dwell on how it's going to be really uncomfortable and all the rest of it, and in that way fuel a certain tone in myself. But this is the beauty of Enlightenment practice. I have the option of going beyond all this. And as I said, it's not easy, but it's possible. Do I continue to fuel this tone, which is part of my false imagination? Or do I practice? And I suppose I should say something about the options that we've got here, because it's not mentioned in this verse. It's been mentioned often enough before, but we can come back to the attention. And if this doesn't seem like a great prospect, or a particularly inspiring prospect, well, I suggest that there's an opportunity here to look at your own disposition. Because if you can come back to the attention, you're coming back to consciousness, and you're coming back to pure awareness. And this is a very wonderful thing. If you don't see it as a wonderful thing, then you've brought some baggage with you. You're still carrying some baggage, and you need to deepen your practice. Verse 308 says some more about this. False imagination can never be perfect knowledge. The word here is nishpanna. It is not productive of anything else but itself. Then one knows what is meant by ultimate truth, whose self-nature is purity. And the point here is, you're never going to find the answer out there. You're never going to find the answer in here either. You're not going to find it out there in terms of rearranging your lifestyle or your possessions or whatever. You can certainly do all that if you want to make things better relative to what's going on out there. But you're not going to find this perfect knowledge, nishpanna. This is the third reality which is spoken of. There are these two realities that I mentioned earlier of the false imagination and the relativity aspect of existence. These are two realities which we have to cut asunder to get to this nishpanna, which is that of perfect knowledge. And we can only get there by cutting ourselves off from these two realities, which means not letting our attention get caught up in them. We don't go and live in a cave or anything. It's to do with the attention, cutting the attention off from them, extricating it from this magnetic field, demagnetizing it. So we can't find the answer out there in the physical world. We can't find the answer in our own personal psychology. My own personal psychology is a disaster zone. It'd be quite ridiculous to find it there. And I suspect most other people's personal psychology isn't too different once they look into it. So we can't find the answer by shuffling things around out there or shuffling things around in here. We only find the answer by coming back to the pure nature of the attention and not let the attention get hijacked all over the place. And then we know for ourselves what is meant by ultimate truth. And the meaning of purity.